Let me paint you a picture. Imagine the world's straight A student, the model kid who never cheats, never lies, always hands in homework early, suddenly caught red handed having parties with drug dealers, lighting cigars with $100 bills. That is Singapore right now. Since 2020, Singapore has been on a rocket ride, overtaking Hong Kong to become Asia's financial darling. But here's the thing about rockets, they look spectacular until something goes wrong. One crack in the engine, one wrong move, and the explosion is sudden, brutal, and very public. And Singapore just had its crack, a $3 billion money laundering scandal, the biggest in its history. The kind of scandal that makes people ask, is Singapore really the clean, trusted hub it claims to be? Or has it become the world's newest laundromat for dirty money? Now let's rewind and talk about Singapore's meteoric rise. For decades, Singapore was the little sibling to Hong Kong. Hong Kong was the pearl of the Orient, cosmopolitan, free, and buzzing with capital. Singapore? Just a red dot on the map, right? Nice, clean, efficient, but never quite as exciting. And that changed in 2019. The Hong Kong protests against Beijing's extradition bill shook the city to its core. And then came the 2020 national security law. Overnight, the things that made Hong Kong special, judicial independence, free speech, a semi-autonomous status, were dead. And wealthy people are like migratory birds. They fly where it's warm, safe, and predictable. Hong Kong's winter became Singapore's summer. So suddenly, this little red dot became the only place on earth that checked all the boxes, right? English common law, Chinese speaking community, low taxes, and world-class financial system. The Singapore government saw the writing on the wall and rolled out the red carpet with its Global Investor Program, GIP. Invest Singapore dollar 2.5 million, about 2 million USD, and you get permanent residency. No drama, no waiting list. Bring your family, bring your fortune. Welcome to Singapore. And by 2024, Singapore wasn't just catching up to Hong Kong, it was overtaking it. The island had become the new wealth of Asia's rich. But wealths only work if people believe they are uncrackable. And in 2024, that illusion was shattered. Here's where things got ugly. On August 15th, 2023, a normal Tuesday night, Singapore police rolled out an operation straight out of a Hollywood movie. Over 400 officers stormed 94 locations, mansions, luxury condos. The targets? 10 foreigners, most originally from China's Fujian province. What did they find? Piles of cash, exotic cars, jewelry, gold bars, even cryptocurrency wallets stuffed with millions. The total amount? 3 billion Singapore dollars. That is 2.2 billion USD. And the men behind it weren't just small-time crooks. They were the masterminds of one of the biggest transnational money laundering operations in the world. Their syndicate made billions through online gambling and telecom scams across Southeast Asia, and then funneled the dirty money into Singapore to whitewash it. How? Easy. Shell companies, fake shareholder loans, etc. They moved the money bit by bit, disguised it as business revenue, and then flipped it into Singaporean assets, right? Family offices, luxury goods, mansions. And once you have legal companies with clean profits, applying for the Singapore residency was just cherry on the top. Dirty money became clean money, and criminals became respectable residents. And the Singapore, the clean financial hub, was their laundromat. Now fast forward to April 2024, courts start handing down sentences. All the Chinese nationals got jail sentences. The public breathes a sign of relief. The bad guys are caught. The system works, right? Not so fast. In July 2025, the Monetary Authority of Singapore, MAS, dropped its own bombshell. $27 million in fines slapped on 9 major financial institutions for massive compliance failures. And this wasn't some no-name banks list. We're talking Credit Suisse, UBS, Citi, and even homegrown giant UOB. Think about that. The guardians of the global financial system. Banks that lecture the world about compliance were asleep at the wheel while billions of dirty Chinese money flowed through their accounts. This was Singapore's second largest anti-money laundering fine ever, right after the infamous 1MDB scandal. Except this time, the spotlight was squarely on Singapore itself. And while the financial world was crumbling, another implosion went off, this time political. In April 2025, He Qin, wife of former Prime Minister Li Hsien-loong and CEO of Temasek Holdings, shared a scathing post about Xi Jinping on Facebook. It compared him to a mafia boss. Hours later, she deleted it. But come on, this is the internet age. Delete doesn't mean gone. And the post ripped open the fragile curtain between Singapore and China. Suddenly, the world saw cracks in Singapore's delicate balancing act. On one hand, China, the giant neighbor whose capital now floods Singapore. On the other, Singapore's deep ties with the West, its rule of law, its need to maintain independence. And for Beijing, this wasn't just one woman's opinion. This was the first lady of Singapore we're talking about. And for Singapore, it was a reminder. The money flowing in from China doesn't just come with wealth. It comes with massive baggage. And the numbers are insane. Family offices in Singapore exploded from 400 in 2020 to over 2,000 by 2024. McKinsey estimates $400 billion in Chinese wealth flowed into Singapore by 2023. Goldman Sachs says hundreds of billions more shifted from Hong Kong. And you can see it in property prices. Luxury homes, especially the famed good class bungalows, hit record highs. And here's the thing about Singapore. It is a paradox wrapped inside a success story. On a map, it's just, 700 square kilometers, basically the size of Beijing's Caoyang district. Or if you're American, it's smaller than New York City. No oil, no farmland, no natural resources. Heck, the country even has to import sand to reclaim land. And yet, this thought has outpunched giants. Singapore built its prosperity not on natural resources, but on two invisible resources: talent and trust. Talent is its oil, trust is its gold mine. But here's the paradox. When your survival depends on sucking in talent, money, and information from the entire planet, you can't afford to be picky, right? You have to act like the world's hungriest sponge, just absorbing everything that comes your way. Capital? Wow, suck it in. Entrepreneurs, suck them in. Global elites looking for safe harbor? Suck them in. And that sponge strategy worked miracles. It turned Singapore from a, swampy fishing village into one of the richest places on earth in just 2 generations. But sponges don't just soak up water. They soak up dirt, oil, and whatever grime is in the mix. And that's what we are seeing now. For every brilliant scientist Singapore attracted, it also pulled in a scammer looking for cover. For every billionaire family office, there's a Fujian gang member laundering gambling money. For every global citizen waving a passport, there's a political agenda hitching a ride. And the danger is this: a sponge that bursts cannot be patched. Once trust is broken, once reputation cracks, no amount of scrubbing makes people forget the dirt that leaked out. Singapore's greatest strength, its brand, as clean, efficient, incorruptible, could flip overnight into its greatest weakness, if not protected. And this is the price of being small. If the US screws up, investors grumble, but they stay because size alone is a safety net. But Singapore, just one slip, one scandal too many, and capital can just evaporate fast. That's the paradox. Being small lets you be nimble, but it also means you just live like one crisis away from collapse. And here's the part that really burns. For ordinary Singaporeans, this scandal wasn't just about criminals with Ferraris. It was about something far more personal: their homes. Let's be real. In Singapore, housing isn't just shelter. It's identity, stability, pride. The government has spent decades selling the home ownership dream, right, through its HDB program. Owning a flat isn't just an asset, it's a rite of passage. And parents tell their kids, study hard, work hard, get a good job, and you will have your own place one day. But what happens when you do everything right, ace your exams, grind through long hours, save every cent, and you're still outbid by some shady Fujian businessman from China who pays $100 million in cash for a mansion? That's just not fair. And for years, Singaporeans have grumbled about rising property prices. Too many foreigners buying in, right? Rich Chinese driving up the market. But this scandal proved it wasn't just the rich, it was dirty. The competition wasn't just with some hardworking billionaires. It was with scam lords, casino kings, and money launderers who treated Singapore's luxury homes like monopoly squares. Imagine being a young Singaporean couple, just working respectable jobs, say a teacher and an engineer, saving for a modest condo. You tour an open house, picture your future kids in the bedroom, and then find out the unit got snapped up in cash by a foreign investor who doesn't even live there. Now, multiply that heartbreak by tens of thousands of families across the island. The anger is real. When news broke that money launderers were hoarding good class bungalows, right? Singapore's crown jewel properties, the outrage went nuclear. It wasn't just about prices, it was about justice. Why should criminals get mansions while ordinary Singaporean citizens can't even dream of one? And this fury spilled into parliament. Lawmakers grilled ministers. Why weren't the red flags caught earlier? How did criminals slip through the global investor program so easily? Was MAS asleep? The government insisted Singapore will never be a safe haven for criminals. But to ordinary Singaporeans, the damage was already done. Because here's the ugly truth. When criminals inflate the market, everyone pays. Prices get distorted, and the average Singaporean shoulders the cost. It fuels inequality, widens the gap between elites and regular folks, and erodes the faith in the system. And in a country built on the promise of meritocracy, where people genuinely believe that effort equals reward, that betrayal cuts deep. And worse still, it feeds a dangerous perception that Singapore isn't just welcoming money. It's welcoming any money, clean, dirty, doesn't matter, as long as it comes with enough zeros. And once that idea takes root, trust, the very foundation of Singapore's brand, starts to crumble from within. And this is where the scandal really hurt. Singaporeans always believed their system was incorruptible, that their housing walls were tough but fair, that their country wasn't like Hong Kong or Macau, where dirty money greased the wheels. Now, they were staring at headlines calling Singapore a money laundering haven. Bloomberg, Financial Times, global media, tearing down the golden brand of trust. And in finance, Reputation isn't just branding, it's lifeblood. Lose it, and clean capital walks away. Now, to its credit, Singapore moved fast. A cross-agency task force launched. MAS raised the bar for family offices. I think now 10% of assets must be invested locally, and there are tougher tax rules. And banks were ordered to vet clients more carefully. Real estate agents, accountants, everyone told to tighten the checks. And a message to the world, Singapore isn't a laundromat. Not now, not ever. But here's the catch. Rebuilding trust takes years, and the world has already seen the crack. Now, let's pull back the curtain, because the $3 billion scandal isn't just about greedy Fujian gangsters buying Lambos with scam money. It's really about China and how its shadow follows wherever its money goes. Take the CCP's fox hunt operations. These are Beijing's global manhunts, ostensibly about catching corrupt officials who fled abroad with stolen money. Sounds noble, right? Clean up corruption. But here's the problem. Fox hunt doesn't always play by international law. Instead of using extradition treaties, Beijing leans on quiet threats, pressuring countries to hand over suspects outside normal legal channels. And Singapore, with billions in Chinese wealth parked in its banks, is a prime target. Beijing doesn't just want to follow the money, it wants Singapore to bend its judicial independence to Chinese demands. And that puts Singapore in an impossible position. Obey Beijing and tarnish its reputation for rule of law, or resist Beijing and risk retaliation. For a small state built on trust, that's not just a headache. That's an existential dilemma. Let's rewind to the 2016 and the Terrex incident. Singapore's military vehicles, fresh from a training exercise in Taiwan, were transiting through Hong Kong. Beijing, furious about Singapore's defense ties with Taiwan, had Hong Kong authorities seize the vehicles. Picture this. Singapore's military hardware held hostage in a Hong Kong port like contraband goods. And Beijing's message was crystal clear. Don't get too cozy with Taiwan, or we will embarrass you in public. That is humiliation. And it showed Singapore exactly how far China was willing to go to flex its muscle. And then there's the Huawei 5G saga. In 2020, as the US-China fought over 5G dominance, Singapore found itself in the middle, right? Washington pushed hard. No Huawei in your core networks. And Beijing pushed back. Huawei is our national champion. Singapore's solution? The ultimate balancing act. It picked Nokia and Ericsson for the core infrastructure, pleasing the Americans, but left Huawei some scraps in a non-core network to avoid completely angering Beijing. Classic Singapore. Split the baby in half. Keep everyone just irritated enough, but not furious. But here's the catch. That balancing act is getting harder every year. the more Chinese capital floods into Singapore through family offices, property, and banks, the harder it is to, separate clean from dirty, political from financial. Every billionaire with a good class bungalow might also be someone's white glove, 白手套, a middleman for the CCP elite. And when Beijing decides to chase its people abroad, Singapore becomes the hunting ground. And this is why He Qing's Facebook post in April 2025 hit like a thunderclap. She wasn't just criticizing Xi Jinping as authoritarian. She was expressing a frustration simmering inside Singapore's elite that China's constant pressure, bullying, and demands are eroding Singapore's autonomy. For years, Singapore has prided itself on punching above its weight, right? Hosting the Shangri-La dialogue, mediating disputes, just being everybody's friend. But when one friend is the United States and the other friend is the Chinese Communist Party, you're not going to be Switzerland. I'm sorry. You're the kid holding a stick of dynamite, trying to juggle it without losing your fingers. And Beijing knows that Singapore is small. And that's the whole point. When you are tiny, you don't get to say no easily, do you? That's why the CCP uses economic leverage, military intimidation, and now, through scandals like this, financial infiltration. And the question hanging over Singapore isn't just, will it stay clean? It's, will Singapore stay independent? Because remember, Singapore's brand is trust, rule of law, neutrality, stability. If that is compromised, even slightly, then all the wealth migration from Hong Kong, all the family offices, all the inflows of Chinese capital could end up being a Trojan horse. So here's the trillion-dollar question. Can Singapore keep being the world's good kid? Trusted, clean, reliable? Or will the sponge finally burst under the weight of everything it absorbed? Because make no mistake, when a sponge bursts, it doesn't just leak water, right? It floods.